Ninjas in Pajamas have won the Starladder I-League StarSeries Season 2. Quite a complicated name there because obviously they switched to partnering with I-League, which is like that Chinese tournament, to make StarSeries into this new age of StarSeries, whereas in the past we had seasons in the past going up to, I think 14 was the last one, the one that was in Minsk earlier this year, and then the one in Kiev that VP won a few months ago was like an invitational of some kind. So winning this tournament not only put NiP back on top for this tournament and give them their second big title of the year. Obviously won Drew McMalmu earlier in the year when they beat Na'Vi in the final. But again, this is a tournament they've won that is far from a joke. I mean, prize money, $150,000 for first place. You look at the teams in the tournament, okay, sure. Because you start at the top of the rankings, you do have to say, okay, no SK Gaming, the best team in the world, the Brazilian team, two-time major champions. But aside from them, you got pretty much everyone else you'd want to see here. You got Virtus.pro, winners of E-League, top 4 at the last major, one of the best teams in the world. They went out in the group stage here. You got Na'Vi, obviously a team where already a very good team. They were dropping off, admittedly, at the end when E-League and the Major came around, but still pretty strong, super deep map pool, and they just added Simple. Superstar talent, guy we're all looking to. A lot of people looking at this team, myself included, saying, hey, with no SK, maybe they win this tournament. Maybe they become the next best team in the world, especially if we don't know what's going on with SK and Fur and all that situation. Na'Vi goes out in the group stage here, but okay, Na'Vi was here at the tournament. And then you add in G2. Okay. So if SK is the clear number one, yeah, you have VP. In the past, you had Na'Vi. G2 was right there as a contender. They were a team really giving, obviously, the guys from SK a whole lot of hell because in the EPL finals, remember, it went to 5 games. And then they obviously smashed the team SK. They were LG at the time, obviously, in the final of ECS. Even gave them a close game on Cobble at the major. Then, once you get outside of the contenders, the favourites, you got a pretty strong pool of teams here. You have Astralis, okay, haven't been good for a long time. We know the talent's there, though, and they did show up at this tournament. Cloud9 have been ever rising, and with this automatic change, look like they've gotten a good run of form under their feet. Obviously had a good run here. Flipside had a great run at the major, admittedly not a whole lot since then. Dignitas haven't been so good, but they're gradually working things out. They've got Magic Spoil now. It seems like that's fixed things. FaZe always have talent, even if we know they don't get a lot of deep placings. Envious is a team which still has some good players and managed to have a decent run here. And Godsend, obviously, we know has the pedigree. They have the champions. Don't necessarily have the firepower at the moment. Haven't shown us any good results, but people were hyped to see them. So this is a very legit tournament. That's what I want to stress at the beginning for the fact that NiP's won it. Then you got to add in, they won the tournament with a stand-in. The first time in CSGO history anyone's ever won a big tournament with a stand-in. Now, in this tournament, let's go through some of the kind of the run that NiP had. So in the group stage, they played Godsend. It was the first big offline game for the Godsend lineup since they got Flusher, Crims, and JW. And actually, they smashed Godsend. It was very easy. I think that was a game on Overpass. And it was just very easy for NiP. It made Godsend look bad. Although, admittedly, Godsend have been doing a pretty good job recently themselves online and making themselves look bad. Obviously, lost to alternate attacks and aren't in Season 2 of E-League in terms of the offline portion. In the playoffs, we had a classic matchup. So NiP goes into the playoffs, and who should they meet? Oh, Astralis. The same Astralis they met a million times when they were TSM and when they were Dignitas. And what usually happens when they meet Astralis in playoff scenarios? Well, in the vast majority of times throughout history, NiP gets the win. And you know what? Usually NiP gets the win in 3 maps. And it was the same thing here. Astralis won the first map. NiP came back and won the second map. Astralis won Cash. I think NiP won Dust 2 maybe. And then the decider, NiP takes, classic fashion, and it's just what you expect, unfortunately, from Astralis now. They had a decent enough performance, but overall, NiP had a solid enough cushion that this wasn't like that close a series, even though they lost a map. So they're up into the semi-finals, and in the semi-finals, they meet Cloud9. Now, admittedly, Cloud9 had like a reasonably easy run to get to a semi-final, but again, the field still had good teams in it, and it just so happens, because of the way it played out, that Cloud9 never had to play any super sick teams together. But you come in thinking, okay, maybe Cloud9 give them a chance here, a game here. I mean, Cloud9, known to be decent Overpass. Cloud9, one of their favourite maps is Dust 2. So the maps come up, and actually Cloud9 gets completely smashed. I mean, NiP just ran all over them. Cloud9's players played particularly poor. Stu2K had one of the worst series of his career since he became the best player on Cloud9. Overall, pretty terrible series. And then on the other side of the equation, classic Get Right. This was Get Right doing some heavy lifting, reaching back into that 2014, 2013, 2012 form where he used to be an absolute monster. Really classic series. And that was obviously a theme throughout this whole tournament of Get Right really being back on form. So they get to the final and they're facing G2. Now, obviously, there's so much history between these teams is, because you look at some of the players on G2 back when they were, obviously this was Titan and the very games, some of them have played finals against NiP in 2012, some of them have played finals in 2013, some of them have been playing games ever since then. These always had a great, it's the original rivalry in CSGO, was obviously Very Games versus NiP, and it was essentially that reunited. But it brought with it a couple of interesting storylines. So, for example, over his career, when he reaches the final, if he plays NiP there, Shox had never lost once. He'd won 7 straight finals against NiP in his career. Meanwhile, RPK only played those finals from earlier in his career in 2012, and he lost, I think it was, 4 finals to NiP. So he'd never won a final against NiP. So someone's streak was going to get broken. Obviously, in this case, it was Shox's. Then you looked at the maps that came out. So the maps came out and they were Cache first, Overpass second, Cobblestone third. Now that immediately made it really interesting, because I looked at those maps and I was like, if GQ come in really good form, G2 wins this 2-0, because NiP used to be the masters of Cache when they first got Pith in the lineup and when they had that run at Drink Malmö, and everyone was scared of them on Cache, and they actually probably were the best Cache team in the world. But since then, their cash has started to fall off a bit. They'd won something like 1 out of the last 4 coming into this final here. Obviously lost to Astralis earlier in the tournament. I think they just 1 out of the last 4 is all they'd won. Meanwhile, we know G2, cash is right up there. It's their second, third best map, whatever you want to call it. Fantastic map for those guys. But it does rely on them being strong on T-side. Now, NiP managed to take this map convincingly, good on both sides of the game. So, okay, fair enough. So we went into the second map. Second map was Overpass. Now, Overpass is a map that even more so was going over to the G2 side, because G2, it's been their really dangerous pocket pick. It's been a map where they haven't had to bring out much, because as soon as they brought it out a few times, people were scared of it, people banned it. People in general don't want to play Overpass if the other team's very good on Overpass anyway, because not many teams are good on Overpass. So G2 showed it a few times. Obviously, they beat Luminosity, now SK on it twice. They beat Fnatic on it, smashed them in the ECS semi-finals. So most people don't want to play them on Overpass. But the reason why NiP's willing to play them on Overpass is NiP really embraced this map the last few months. NiP improved a lot, and even if they lost, they'd have close games on it. In this tournament already, you'd seen improved form on it. They looked a lot better there. So they were willing to play it. And as you saw, it was a classic game. One of the best single maps of CSGO you will probably ever see, because it was truly back and forwards. Even rounds when people won them, both teams were in the rounds. It was different runs of form from different players. People having some great highlight rounds, some body clips, some Freiburg clips, Shox with some impact kills, Scream putting up mad numbers. Obviously, Forest having a pretty good game overall. So this was a fantastic map. NiP won it, so NiP win the series 2-0. We never had to get to Cobblestone. Now, Cobblestone would have been very interesting, because NiP's been good on it the last few months, although NiP themselves have dropped off in overall form on all maps. Meanwhile, the guys from G2 were good on it early on when they had that really sick streak of form from EPL onwards, but it's always been one of the really shaky maps in the middle. It really depends on the opponent if they can win that. So I think if it had gone to a third map, it could have been a really, really exciting and perhaps very shocking game. Never did. NiP won 2-0. Now, part of the reason they were able to win is because the guy I gave my MVP award to is Forest. Now, for this tournament, Forest was in absolute god mode. It has been the case that he has been the best NiP player over the last, 5-6 months. He's just been the best player overall. He's the only one who hasn't really dropped off his level a whole lot. And he's just been in fantastic form. And in this tournament particularly, this was like classic Forest from early CSGO. Talking like 2013 Forest, where his skills were really on. He was good throughout the majority of the games. He had pretty much almost no bad maps throughout the whole tournament. He just consistently put in a really good performance and exerted his skills for impact kills. So what more do you want to say? He wins the tournament. He's the MVP. It also notably saw a return of Freiburg to a little bit of form. Now, I do think, from seeing community feedback on this, and even some pro players, etc., people are going too far. Because he's done so badly for so long, and even in the last couple of months, people want to be like, oh, finally, yes, oh, I love Freiburg, like classic player, great entry Freiburg back in the day. We know he works up really hard, so now he's really good again. Oh, and he had a fantastic tournament. No, don't go too far with that, okay? In the final, he played very well. He had a very good final, and he had some key impact plays in the final. But actually, if you look at this entire campaign as a whole at StarSeries Season 2, his stats, not at all impressive, actually. He had essentially like a very average performance in terms of overall stats. When you consider his team won the tournament, actually maybe a little bit below average from what you'd expect. He died actually statistically ever so slightly more than he got kills. And his actual overall fragging, we're talking like, I think it was like 0.64, 0.63 or something. So good, but nothing like above our, nothing particularly good, nothing stellar. decent enough performance, played his role, had a big final, obviously certainly helped there. And so good overall, but don't go too crazy and make out like he's back, he's the best entry fragger, it's going to be really good. No, we need to have tournaments like this, if not better, in the future from Freiburg to continue justifying his place within this team. Now, obviously, the really interesting thing about this final was the stand-in factor, because they had Maikelele there and they've won the tournament with him. Now, people will say, as people like Apex did, but there's pre-existing chemistry there. Okay, yeah, but not in the traditional sense. Like, chemistry is something that you build up and you maintain. Now, they have no maintained chemistry. The last time they played with Maikelele was 1.5 years ago, many metas ago, on different maps and against totally different opponents. So, it doesn't really work in that sense. Still, to me, because of how much time's gone by, a stand-in. Now, what's interesting is, in the way that it's not a stand-in, the way there was chemistry, is the way Maikelele came into NiP. And by the way, I wrote an article on this very topic. It's called Return of the Mac, and it's in the link below, and it goes through his time in NiP and then coming back to NiP, covers all of this stuff and this tournament today. I wrote it today, I've published it today, it's in the description box below. So the reason why I think it worked bringing Maikelele back in is if you ever looked when Maikelele first came into the team, he came in and his first event in November of 2014 was the major. It was DreamHack Winner 2014. He came in, boom, he immediately got into form with them, played well, played this wildcard role. They had success, they made it to the final, they were at championship point, they just lost to LDLC. Then the next tournament he played at, MLG X Games Aspen Invitational. They made it to the final there, he played really great against Fnatic in the semi-final, probably the best series ever played. Got to the final, didn't have such a good final, lost the title again to LDLC, but 2 finals in a row. This guy has natural chemistry with these players. That's the interesting part. And part of it, which I'm going to get to in a second, is how his role and his skill set and strengths match up with the rest of NiP. That's what's really interesting to me. So this is a guy where there is chemistry, but it's natural chemistry, actually. It's not pre-existing chemistry. So that's why he is a stand-in. It's just that he's a stand-in who naturally has some sort of crazy chemistry with these guys. So you've got to add in, part of what makes him work within his team is you've got to look at his skill set, okay? And in fact, if you want a little blast from the past, I'll link it up here. I made a video about his skills right after MLG X Games Aspen, about like him being a streaky sniper and how they used him. And he's a player where actually when they made the decision to cut him in favour of Alu, in-game, I thought that was a bad decision. I thought he fit better with what they had in the team. I could understand from a social aspect why they did it. So think about Maikelele's style, especially when he's an AWPer like he is in NiP. He's a very streaky AWPer, and he has that Chris J style of AWPing, where what you do is you just re-peek the same spot again and again and again really quickly, and the second you peek out, you scope and you fire a shot really quick. You don't try to like line it up or use a tripwire style or wait for the guy to move into it or just like predict next way he's going to go. You just try and lace it right onto him instantly with a flick. And the problem with that style is it's going to make you very streaky, as it does Chris J. When you're hitting your shots and when you're really on form, the good part is because you're firing so fast, you're going to hit a lot of shots that the stable AWPer wouldn't hit. You're going to get a lot of really quick kill and kill sequences, or you're going to get an early pick on someone that's going to maybe really open up a chance for your team, and maybe it can turn a whole round. And at times when people run you down, you kill 2 or 3, it's going to look fantastic and you look like a really strong player. The problem is, this style, especially when you see Maikelele use it, it's too risky as well, because you're going to miss a lot of shots. When you're not hitting your shots in general, you're going to take peeks where you're re-peeking into a situation where the other AWPer has you or the other team's ready for you, and they'll just kill you outright. Therefore, to get those kills, you risk giving up deaths. So at times it works, you're going to get the kills, but in general, you're going to give up almost roughly as many kills, if you look statistically, as you're getting. You're going to give up as many deaths, usually around that number, as you get kills. So that was the story for Maikelele when he was in LGB, and then when he was in SK and ESG, and then that was the story in NiP as well. He has the maps that are crazy, but his overall game, it's more like he creates impact kills. He doesn't have an overall impact in terms of like scoreboard or mad damage output or anything like that, or great differential. That's not where you're going to see the strength from him. So the key detail to me in this sense is he made NiP more explosive in the past and did here as well. So what happens is when you have him in the team, because he's getting these key impact kills for you, it really balances out the team, because in theory you want your best players on NiP to be Get Right and Forest. Fantastic entry and himself second AWPer, and obviously the classic clutch lurker in terms of Get Right, which you saw him going back to more now, but obviously he does a bit of entrying in the threat system. The other 2 players, obviously Freiburg plays a very bare entry style, and then Exist tries to be like a support player and win some clutch rounds, but has had his problems over the last year and a half. So in terms of like who you want in terms of carrying the load, this is why Maikelele fits with this team. Not only does he get you impact kills, when which the team play and the communication and that kind of cohesive strength of NiP from playing together for so long is going to then take advantage of having those numbers situations. But you've got to add in that it means it's a good bridge between the lesser players who are playing the roles and the star players. Because ideally, with a player like Maikelele, you don't want him to be your best or second best player. You don't want him to be the star. You want Get Right and Forrest to be the stars. He'll be that third player. He'll have the odd crazy game. Overall, he'll just make impact kills. He'll make plays. He'll be a wild card in that sense. And you'll play off him in that particular sense. And he'll have kind of like the green light to do what he wants. But he doesn't have to carry the game. So the issue here is it worked. Get Right and Forrest went off in this tournament. Therefore, fantastic. It worked out for Maikelele. The problem is that won't necessarily happen all the time. So that's, we got to ask the question that everyone's probably going to ask. Oh, should they just kick Pitt? Should they just get Maikelele instead? It's not as simple as that. Like, here's the thing. If you didn't have to consider anything else, when you consider the problems NiP had recently, sure, it would certainly be an interesting move. I don't think NiP's going to do it, unfortunately, because the reason why they kicked Maikelele in the first place was some of them didn't like him on a social level. Not as in they didn't like him as a person, but in-game. They didn't, like, he wasn't calm enough, or he didn't vibe with the way they wanted to play the game. Got people a bit too kind of like their energy's up when they want to be more cool and calm and collected. And so you look when they lost that tournament, iOS Pantamera, and how badly it went. I think that was just where they were like, right, we'll try someone else at this point in time. Presumably practices also maybe weren't ideal. So it's not about the in-game stuff, although personally I think it should be. And unfortunately NiP has shown a trend of not making moves based on in-game stuff. They don't kick players like Exist or Freiburg. Even if they're performing really badly, they'll wait forever because they like those people as people. And guess what? That's why they've given up a lot of chances to win championships and to get those great players that Fanatics and the others in the world get and become fantastic. So it's their choice. That's the consequence of their decisions in the market. So it's also not as simple as much as, remember, in the past few months, Pitt was one of the best players in NiP. Like, I look at NiP, here's the story of NiP over the last 6 months, okay? Forrest, the best player by far. Most tournaments he's played well in. Anytime they've won or gone deep, he's played really well and been their best player. Get Right has actually started off pretty good in the threat Pith era, and then really started to struggle a bit, wasn't playing like a star. Exist dropped off a cliff and only did well at the tournaments they had the big runs at, Malmo particularly. Freiburg was bad throughout most of this period, actually, up to this tournament here where he had the good final. So you look at the team overall, and they were a team lacking for firepower. So part of the issue here is Pitt's actually been pretty good for NiP. He's been the second best player over the last 3 or 4 months. So when you look at this team, if you take Pitt off it and you put Maikelele in, you're not going to have that condition I said that you need to have, which is that you need to have Get Right and Forrest going both ham, then have Maikelele as the third star. At the moment, we don't know that Get Right will play at this in the next tournament. We don't know that the rest of the team Exist had a much elevated tournament this one. Get Right, Freiburg just didn't play bad. We don't know how many of these elements can be present. Therefore, the formula might not work again. You can't just run it over and think, well, they'll keep winning. Because remember, when NiP won Malmo, people were like, oh, well, they'll just keep doing this and win many events. Never won another event, of course, because they won that very narrowly off a bunch of initial advantages that started going away. People just banned cash against them. They only won some of those other games narrowly. They played against better teams. Yeah, they had their issues. Get Right dropped off as a star. It wasn't as simple. They couldn't just play that abusive style that they found for entering, that Get Right threat designed for them. People actually adapted to it. Also, you got to consider that as well. There's the threat issue. So they weren't really using threat that much here because he was at home and he was having to send information in. It's not the same as when he stood behind you. So you got to add in the factor that Exists in-game style does this. He's good for a while, and then it drops off a bit. And that's why when it drops off and gets stale, that's when they want threat to be involved. So I think it's still very uncertain that they'll be able to do this in future tournaments, even if they were to bring Maikelele in. So the key detail is, bringing Maikelele in would be good in some senses. I'm not even necessarily against it. I might do it myself and kick one of the other players. Maybe Exist or someone. They're probably not going to do it themselves since they need the in-game leader now. Will they kick Freiburg? He's more the entry type player sometimes. Not as much now, you'll note. But you see what I mean? It's actually a very difficult situation for NiP to know which direction to go in light of this success that they've had at this point in time. The key detail for me to make is, though, just recruiting Maikelele would not solve NiP's problems. Their problems are far-reaching than that. So the map pool, the stars are not playing like stars, the role players are playing like shit the last few months, and so they've got a whole bunch of issues across the board. This win does not put NiP back up to like top 3 status and mean that they're going to be the challenger for SK, win the next major. They're a good team. They showed a great performance here, really overperformed, had a great one-off run with Maikelele. I don't know if that's reproducible. And also, I don't know what happens now when they go back to the old NiP. I don't think they just suddenly become super good. I don't think they should be as bad as they were at Cologne, where they couldn't even get past Flipside. But I feel like they're going to hang around like the bottom half of the top 10 for the next 6 months or so. I don't know yet what they change or what changes in terms of performance, individually or across the team, that brings them out of that scenario. With that said, obviously this was a very memorable run. We'll all remember it for the fact that, like I said, no one's ever won with a stand-in before. If you want to read more about Maikelele's career, article in the description box below.